In this video, I'm going to share several Revit schedule tips and tricks that include some new features that have been added in 2022 through 2025, but some of these are just good old school tips and tricks you may or may not be aware of. So follow along and share your comments if you have some other good tips to share. So I'm going to start by creating a new schedule. In fact, before I do that, we can now sort schedules similar to how you can sort views into different groupings. If we right-click on the Schedules node in the project browser and go to Browser Organization, on the Schedules tab we can click New. Just going to type Test for a minute to show you that on the sorting and grouping, when you click the drop-down, you'll have options here related to parameters associated with schedules. So phase schedule, none of these are probably ones we want to sort by. So for example, if I just click a schedule here, some of those parameters we saw on the list are going to show up in either the instance or the type properties. In this case, I'm going to quickly make a new one. So I'm going to go to Project Parameters, click New, and I'll call this Sched Sort, make it a text parameter, click on a parameter and type S to jump down to schedules. So now we have everything set up so that when we go back to sorting schedules or browser organization, click New, Schedule Sorting. Now in this drop-down list, we'll see this parameter that we created. So this is going to group them by that. There's also sort by view. Then we'll hit OK. And so now when we click on this node in the project browser, and in that dialog I was just in, I could have switched and selected it there to actually apply it. But we can apply it like this. And of course everything went straight into the question mark section like it normally does when something doesn't have a value for a sort by field. So maybe this is FF&E or furniture or something like that, but as soon as I type that, now you can see that we have an FF&E node in the project browser, and we could do that with the rest of these schedules to sort them however we want. You could have also, like we've seen, sort them by phase or some other setting. Alright, so now I'm going to create a new schedule. So I'm going to right click, and actually I'm going to just set this back to all for now. Now that you know how that works, right click on the schedule node and there's an option here to create a new schedule. We're going to create a new furniture schedule. We'll give it a name, furniture schedule. I'm going to set the phase to phase 2. Click OK. We're going to make this sort by type mark, or not sort by, but I'm adding these fields or parameters to the schedule. And then I'm just going to hit OK really quick. And now you can see I have this long, messy schedule. In the properties for this particular schedule view, I'm going to go into sorting and filter, or sorting and grouping, and set that to type mark. So now it's sorting by type mark. You can see there's a bunch of blank type marks, and so maybe there's a separate working or QA/QC schedule that lists the blank ones, but here perhaps we want to filter out the blank ones. So type mark has a value rather than does not have a value. The other one might be for the QA/QC view. So now we have everything sorting and grouping as we want it. Another thing that we can do is add count to this schedule. Of course, there's one item per row, so each row is a count of 1. if we go into sorting and grouping and turn off itemize every instance, you can see that the count automatically adds itself up. If we go into formatting and click on count, you can see it's not set to calculation, but that's just an automatic thing that's done in Revit for the count column. Now, on the other hand, if we wanted to add cost to this schedule, so I'm going to click to add cost and hit OK. So chair number 1 cost $879. If I turn on itemize every instance, you can see it's $879 for each chair. Well, what if we wanted the total cost? So when we don't itemize every instance, what if it was 13 times $879? Well, Revit can do that automatically by going back in here on the Formatting tab, select Cost, and tell it to calculate totals, and then hit OK. So now that's calculating the total. If I go back to itemize every instance, of course it'll switch back to the $879 per instance. But because we have it set to calculate totals for the cost parameter on the Formatting tab, it's going to give us the total when we tell it to not itemize every instance. Sorry, clicked the wrong thing there. So the next thing we might want to do is to format the cost or the currency value so that it looks like normal, the way currency is normally listed. To do that, we go to the Formatting tab and click Cost. And then there's an opportunity here to Field Format. And right now it's set to use the project settings. We are going to uncheck this and apply custom settings here, but just so you know where it's coming from, if you were to go to the Manage tab and Project Units, and then on the Common tab, and then Currency, you can adjust things here. You could have a specific US dollar or euro or pound. You can do digit grouping, adjust the number of decimal places, and this would apply everywhere for every schedule column, every schedule, every tag, anywhere currency shows up. But on the other hand, if you wanted just this column to be different from even another column right next to it, you can do that. So you have to remember to select the right parameter on the left here, or the field, and then we go to Field Format, and then uncheck Use Project Settings. And so now we could change the decimal place, we can apply the unit symbol, so the dollar, US dollar symbol, use digit grouping, hit OK, and then the one last thing we might want to do is right justify this so the decimal point lines up, which is pretty common when you see a list of values, and that's going to be not field formatting, but just the cell alignment for that column. So now we've adjusted that. There's some conditional formatting you could do to make things that are 0 highlight red or yellow, or something that's over a certain dollar amount could highlight. The next thing we're going to do is look at this new feature in Revit for when a field varies. Everything here is a type mark, so it's nothing can be different once we don't itemize every instance. And just for this example, I'm going to quickly tell it to itemize every instance for the beginning here, and then I'll add an instance parameter like mark. So instead of clicking on the arrow, I can just double click on mark and it moves it over there. Hit OK, and you can see these marks actually don't have any values in them in this particular project, but now I've made 3 of the chair number 1s have different mark values. And so now if I were to collapse this schedule into grouping, so when I tell it not to itemize every instance, it's doing it based on whatever's set here. So it's grouping them based on type mark. If I were to switch this to mark, then it would group them based on this value. There'd be 3 separate rows and then a 4th row for all the blank ones. So hit OK, and notice how it says varies. So if we go back into the schedule properties here, there's a newer feature in Revit that allows you to tell Revit what to do if the value varies. So the traditional thing was this less than, greater than symbol with the word varies. Here now we have the ability to use project settings just like we saw in the field formatting. And then there's also the ability to edit, and before I do this I have to do what I just mentioned previously. Have to select the correct parameter and then do an override. So maybe there's this is just a warning in this particular schedule to make sure people see that those things should never be different, and so this is to jump out at you and let you know that it's wrong. On the other hand, if we look at, let's look at the furniture schedule, or I'm sorry, level 1 phase 2. So let's click on this chair, and these two chairs, this is CH2, so the mark isn't going to have that same value that I set, but I'm going to set 2 chairs to have some random value, and I happened to type the same random value twice apparently because I got a warning there. But anyways, these 2 chairs have a random value, and if they're both selected, that varies thing that I just showed you is not just for schedules, because varies shows up here in the project browser as well, right? So if I just have 1 chair selected, it shows 1 value. If I select the other chair, it shows that value. But if you select both chairs, whenever there's overlapping numbers, it'll say varies. Well, on the Manage tab under Additional Settings, there's this newer option called Multiple Value Indicator. And so here you could type something different, like I'm going to type something silly, like Dan is cool, just to make it stand out as being something totally unusual. So now when you select 2 things over here in a couple of places, you can actually see Dan is cool. Has nothing to do with the mark parameter. It's just anywhere in Revit ever where there's 2 values in this spot, it's going, or 2 or more values, right, that aren't the same, it's going to show Dan is cool. Whereas if these 2 things had the same value, like this one is 456, and then this one is also 456. Now when I select these 2 things, it says 456. But as soon as I select a third thing, because between all of them, they're not all the same, it does this override. So that's getting off track a little bit from schedules, but interesting stuff nonetheless. So back here in our schedule, maybe we want to start adding totals and counts at the bottom of this schedule. So if we go into sorting and grouping, we can click Add Grand Totals and hit OK, and immediately we get a total cost for all the furniture that's in this schedule, and then there's 236 items. This is just a built-in thing, separate from whether this count column exists or not. If we wanted the count to show up at the bottom of the count column, we go back into sorting and grouping, and first we might say title and totals only. That got rid of that count. And then we go into formatting, select count, and then tell it to calculate the total. So now the 236 shows up here. They're both essentially deriving their information from the same number of elements that are being scheduled. So another thing that's kind of interesting, I'm going to turn off the itemize, or I'm going to turn on itemize every instance here. If I go all the way down to the bottom, the count and the total are still the same. It is possible to list the room name and number here. This has been around for a while, but it's a little bit, or it's not super obvious how you find this, but all of the Revit families, or most of them anyways, are aware of what room or Revit space they are in. So if we go back to the edit for field, in the upper left, there's this drop-down select available fields from, and there's an option here to switch from the furniture parameters or fields to rooms. Architects and interior designers typically use the room command. MEP, lighting design, often use the space command, and then there's also project information like the project number, the project name, a few other things that are on the Manage tab under project information. If I go to room, now I can see the room number and the room name listed here. I hit OK, and now I have a couple extra columns here, and all of these pieces of furniture now are listing what room number and room name they are in. Interesting trick on a really large schedule with lots of columns. You might have the room number on the far left, and if you scroll to the right, now you can't see the room number. You could actually have multiple columns that list the room number. One way to do that is to create a calculated parameter. So I'm going to call this room number 2, I guess. And then we'll make this a text parameter, and then all of the parameters that are in this schedule present themselves in this list. This is a quick way to actually build formulas, because formulas, these parameters are case sensitive and have to be just right. But in this case, all I have to do is pick room number and hit OK. There's no math symbols here. So I just hit OK and OK. And now I have the room number twice. They're totally tied together. If I edit the room number, this copy is going to update. Another thing we can do graphically in this schedule is to turn on row striping. You can actually specify the color for each row, but the default is no color and then a light gray. And then there's a separate checkbox to have the striping actually show up and print on a sheet. Maybe you're just doing this striping for your own reference and working in a schedule in the schedule view, and you don't want it to print that way, then you'd uncheck this. But if you did want it to print how you're seeing it, you can check this box. And anyways, you hit OK, and now you can see there's some nice striping. By the way, you can actually zoom in on schedules. This is also a somewhat newer feature. If you hold the Control key and then spin the wheel on your mouse, you can zoom in and out. And notice down in the status bar, it's telling you Control plus 0 gets you back to 100%. Next, we're going to look at a new feature related to how schedules are placed on sheets. So I'm going to quickly create a new sheet. So right-click on the sheet node and click New Sheet, 22-inch or 34 by 44-inch sheet. And then whatever schedule or view is current, notice how it's bold there in the project browser. So I can quickly remember what schedule I was looking at. I'm going to take this schedule and drag it onto the sheet, placing it starting in the upper left. And then this first part actually isn't new. You can split a schedule, and I like to think of it sort of as a slinky, where you can actually adjust the schedule to have multiple columns. So this entire schedule is now on the sheet. I'm going to make a couple adjustments here to make this schedule act a little bit longer than it really needs to be. So we're going to pretend like this schedule can't quite fit on one sheet. Looks like in this particular case it actually really could. But notice over here, as soon as we started splitting the schedule into separate columns, we now have a plus mark next to the schedule. This part is new. And then the fact that we can select one of these columns or any of them and hit delete and delete it from the sheet. Notice how the square that indicates whether the view is on a sheet or not on a sheet. Now we have a half-filled schedule, meaning it's partially on a sheet. So now if I were to make another sheet, and drag the one that's not on a sheet yet, so I expanded this schedule to see the nested elements, so there's one for each column. And if I decided I wanted a little bit more room and I wanted to move this schedule to that other sheet, I could delete it and then its filled mark would disappear here, the third one down, and then drag that onto the sheet. Another option is to right click and select Move Aligned to Sheet. And so I'm on 1.1 and it created 1.2 as the second sheet. And now I go to this sheet and it put it in the same exact spot. So I most likely have to adjust where it is. If it's the third schedule, I want to move it ahead of the fourth schedule. So that part's a bit manual, but still pretty cool that you can now have a schedule span across multiple sheets. You used to have to use some unfortunate filters to do that. One more thing while we're looking at a schedule on a sheet. If you select the schedule, there's a newer feature in properties here called Resize Rows. And you can have it resize it based on rows with images, or just resize all rows. And then you can type in a height. And now that just sort of messed everything up, but in this case, that's what I typed in and that's exactly what I got. So that's kind of cool. Back here to the actual schedule itself, if I go into the Fields tab, maybe we want just one column that has a room name and number. Normally you wouldn't make a parameter for the room name and number because then you can't split them, but you can put them back together if you do have them separate, and that's using this newer combine parameters command. So I'm going to select go to the room drop down here, and then go down to room number and room name. So it's going to separate the room number and name by a /. I could change this to a dash or a space. Probably want to get rid of this slash or this / at the end here, but I can add a suffix or a prefix to both of those parameters as well. Down here it's actually showing me a little preview of what it's going to look like. Hit OK, and now I have a new column that's going to always stay up to date based on the room number and the room name. So if I were to edit either one of those, this would update automatically. It is possible to include design options in a schedule. If we look at this lobby, so this model, this two-story law office model is from one of my Revit textbooks by SDC Publications. Here's design option 1, which was the default option. And then here's option 2. You can see how the furniture layout changed. And then anything not in a design options in the main model. So by default, a schedule is actually showing the main model, and it's set to automatic for the design option. So in a floor plan you can type VV, Victor Victor, or VG, and get into the visibility graphics, and one of the tabs there, if you have design options, is design options. And schedules, you can't type that shortcut. You can only get to it by clicking the edit button over here in properties. The same edit buttons in floor plans too, but if you use the VV or the VG shortcut, you probably don't use that very often. But now, so because it's set to automatic, the schedule over here is using everything in the main model and the primary option. So option 1. So what's in this schedule right now is the main model and option 1. If I switch it and sort of hardwire it now to say main model plus option 2 stuff and hit OK, you can see things shifted a little bit. As far as I know, there's no way to make a schedule only show the stuff in option 1 or option 2 without doing some sort of custom manual parameter, which isn't ideal, but could be done if you absolutely needed to. If you do know of a way that doesn't involve Dynamo, because most people watching this probably aren't going to actually be able to utilize that, share it in the comments below. So I'm setting it back to the setting that it was set to. The last thing we might want to do here is sort by level. So I'm going to set this back to not itemize every instance, just to clean this up. Actually, I'm going to leave this set to itemize every instance, and then I'm going to go to the level parameter. Every object knows which level it's on, so I'm going to add that to the mix. And now you see that there's a column here for levels, and of course they're in different. They're not all grouped together because it's grouped by type mark, which is fine because we're going to actually go back in here and sort by level and then sort by type mark and hit OK. So now it sorts by level and then type mark. But maybe we want to group level 1 and level 2 separately. So we're going to go into sorting and grouping and insert a header and a footer. This is going to cause the level 1 items to be in a separate group with a different heading than the level 2 items. Maybe we also want a space between the two sections. So now there's a level 1 header. Then we scroll down, and where level 1 ends, we have a level 2 header, and then there's all the level 2 stuff. Well, now this level column is actually redundant, right? We don't need a level 1. If we have a header for level 1 and level 2, we don't need a column probably. So I'm going to go into formatting, select level, and level has to stay in the schedule because you can't sort and group by a parameter that's not in the schedule. But we can actually hide this schedule, or this field, not the schedule. We can hide the level field even though it's still technically in the schedule. And then we're still sorting and grouping by it. Another thing we might want to do is actually have the total cost for each level. I guess that's already listed there. So you see that's listed. If I go into sorting and grouping, the reason it's listed there is because title, count, and totals are selected for this grouping, and then it's selected again for the entire schedule. At some point we might want to export this schedule to Excel. So with the schedule active, you have to click in the schedule to make sure the view itself is active. Go to File, Export, and then scroll down here, and under Reports and Schedule, this is a newer option to pick a CSV format. Used to be just a comma delimited text file, and you'd have to open Excel, go to the File Open command in Excel, and change the files of type to text. Pick the text file. Excel would recognize that it was comma delimited, and you'd go through a series like a wizard to pick what the delimiter is, that it's comma, and then it would turn it into this CSV file. Now you can sort of jump right to being able to just double click on this file and it'll open in Excel. And so all of this data comes through. There's no formulas or anything, it's just the data, but from there you can add formulas and do anything you want with the schedule. There's a few other things I'm just going to quickly allude to without really getting into details. If you want to see more, you can request it in the chat and I'll try and find time to do it. But if we start a new schedule, and multi-category schedules have been expanded to be able to include most things in Revit now. In the past there were quite a few limitations, so you can get, if you make a schedule that's listing family and type, for example, and hit OK, in the past you wouldn't have seen any system families here. So now you can see wall and mullion, all of those show up. So you may need to filter them out if that's not what you want, but in the past there was no way to make those show up, so that's super helpful. Another cool thing that newer versions of Revit can do, if you go to create a new schedule and you're setting it up, let's say rooms for example, and you're going to make a schedule key. In the past it wasn't possible to use shared parameters in a schedule key, and so sometimes you want a schedule key showing up as a room tag in a plan or something like that for the room type that it is, you know, option classroom option A, classroom option B, or high quality apartment, medium quality. I don't know if that's the right wording, but you get what I'm trying to say. Another thing that's possible in conditional formatting, I actually have to go back to my I guess that's where I was, my multi-category schedule. Oh no, I was in I was starting to create a schedule key, but here in a multi-category schedule under conditional formatting, it didn't used to be that family and type could be used for conditional formatting, and so now you see that this is totally functional and possible. And then one last thing, and then I'll wrap this up. If I go to create a new multi-category schedule, one of the options that also wasn't possible before is to create a revision schedule. So in the past you had to use Revit's specific revision schedule command, which is totally separate than the regular schedule command. Here this gives you some opportunities to do some interesting custom things. So, and then there's one very last thing I want to show, and then we'll wrap this up. There's a way of embedding a schedule within a schedule. So let's say you wanted a room schedule that lists the furniture in each room, as opposed to the previous schedule we created, which lists the room items are in. We're going to list the items that are in a room. So I'm going to click to create a new schedule based on rooms. This is the only schedule type, I believe, maybe spaces as well, that can have a nested embedded schedule in it. So I'm just going to give that, make sure that has a unique name. And then since we're in a room schedule, we have the ability to add the room name and number directly. But notice that there's an option here to embed a schedule. So I'm going to check that. And then I'm going to go to Furniture and then Embedded Schedule Properties. So here's a whole nother set of schedule properties for the nested furniture schedule. And so here I'm going to do some of those same parameters as I did for my previous schedule. So type mark, manufacturer, product line. I'm just going to pick a few of these, and then I'll have it sort by type mark. And then for now, I'll just quickly hit OK. And this looks pretty messy. We'll do some conditional formatting to make this look a little better. But here's at the top room number and room name. And then just below that, it's a second header row for the parameters for the nested or embedded schedule. So here's room 223 and its name. So first of all, we might want to sort the main schedule by room number and then hit OK. So now they sorted. We also might want to do the thing where we hide furniture that doesn't have a number, a type mark. So let's go back here and filter the type mark to has a value. And then for the room number and room name, if we add conditional formatting, not equals to blank, and then maybe make it yellow, and then we'll do that for the name as well, not equal to blank. This will make the room name and number stand out a little better. So for room number 112, this is all the furniture that's in the room. And if we wanted it not to itemize every instance, we can uncheck that, and we have to have selected something to sort by because this is the thing that it's going to collapse the rows down to. So again, back to room 112. Now there's chair, chair 2, chair 3, chair 8. In this case, we might also want the count to show up, so we can see how many of each type there are. But there's an interesting example of embedding a schedule within a schedule in Revit. You could actually add a dummy parameter at the beginning. And when I say that, I mean maybe a parameter that's blank, so that you can indent the information a little bit. I'm not quite sure, just trying to think of something. If you remember, the mark was originally mostly blank. So I'll select that. And then that actually, if we go to the very top, we could overwrite the value in this particular schedule. And we could even add another one if we wanted them to be totally offset. Let's do that. Copyright, that's going to most likely be blank everywhere. Nope, that's one of the manufacturers put that in there. So let's take that out real quick. And maybe image will work. And this isn't required, but I'm just doing this to kind of force some formatting. So here's the room name and number, and then below it, in fully indented, is the furniture that's located in that particular room. So that's just a quick overview of some fun Revit tips and tricks. Again, share some of your ideas in the comments below, or any ideas for something else to cover, like cost estimating or more on formulas. Thanks for watching.